Well, welcome back, everybody, and I hope you had a nice cup of tea or coffee or whatever drink of your choice. And it gives me immense pleasure to introduce my lovely colleague and friend, Mina Patel. Mina is currently completing her PhD with us at CRELLA, but most of you will know her as the head of research for the Future of English program at the British Council. Mina has extensive amount of experience, over 25 years of experience in English language teaching, training, and educational management across many diverse contexts, and she's the co-author of Future of English, Global Perspectives. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mina, and over to you.
Thank you, Nahal, and hello everyone, wherever you are in the world. It's lovely of you to join us and for me to be here. Hold on, I'm just going to share my screen and see if this works, actually. Can you let me know if you can see that?
Yes, here we go.
Got it?
Yep.
Fantastic, thank you.
Lovely. Do you want to just click and make sure it's clicking?
It's clicking.
Yes, there we go.
Thanks so much, Nikki.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Nahal,
Thank you,
for
Mina.
introducing me, and it's lovely to see you. So establishing a language assessment literacy framework for an educational organisation is what I'm going to talk about. And as Nahal said, I'm doing my doctoral study with CRELLA, and I have many people to thank for the stage I'm at. The stage I'm at is writing up, but two of them are Tony Green and Fumi Nakatsuhara, without whom I really would not be at this stage. So thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's get started. Let me just start my stopwatch and we're going. The educational organisation I'm going to be talking about today is the British Council, my place of work. And for those of you who don't know very much about the British Council, it is the UK's cultural relations organisation. Its aims are to encourage and promote cultural relationships and educational collaboration between the UK and other countries, as well as develop a wider knowledge and understanding of the English language. So broad remit. It does this at the moment by operating in about 90 countries. And we do that through work in arts, in education, English language teaching, and a lot of work in language testing and assessment. And for my thesis, I have focused on the English and exams departments, because that is where most, not all, where most of our work in language assessment, language testing and assessment is. And kind of work we do research into assessment and testing, test development, English language teaching, test delivery, consultancy, and that's just some of the things that the British Council's involved in, so quite extensively involved in language testing and assessment. In today's presentation, I am going to take you on a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of my study, but I'm going to focus mainly on the findings because that's what I'm writing up about now, and hopefully leave plenty of time for questions. So if I miss bits, you can pick me up during question time. So why am I doing this? So I'm doing this for three reasons. The academic reason is because in reading literature about LAL, I find that the population that I'm going to be talking about is underrepresented or has been underrepresented. It's not that not anybody's doing any work on it. Lots of people are doing work on stakeholders who work with language testing and assessment, but don't have a background in it or haven't necessarily had any training in it. But the particular population I'm going to be talking about, I think, is very underrepresented. On an organisational level, my rationale is, well, I started working with Barry O'Sullivan in the assessment research group, and through that work, I got to know a lot about what was happening in the organisation. And I was really lucky in the assessment research group. I got to go to conferences. I got to meet people like yourselves. I got amazing reading material. So I kind of learned what I know about language testing assessment on the job. However, I did see colleagues in the organisation who weren't as lucky as me and who were genuinely struggling. So the question in my head was, well, why isn't there an organizational steer on LAL when we do so much work in that space? So that was the organizational rationale. The personal rationale is because when I conceived of this study and when I started it, I was one of the population, and I will argue that I think I still am. I know more about language testing and assessment than I did before I started the study, obviously, and I'm very interested in it, but I'm not a specialist in it. So that's my personal reason. Okay, my research questions. I'll let you look at those for a second. So I'm looking at what are the perceptions of LAL needs in the British Council, but specifically, as I said, in English in exams. And in those needs, what are the knowledge and skills that employees perceive are needed by key business functions? Now, what do I mean by key business functions? I'm talking about functions like marketing, like sales, like business development, customer service. So those are the key business functions I'm talking about. And also within kind of, as well as looking at perceptions of needs and the knowledge and skills within that, I really wanted to try and identify the dimensions of what LAL might look like for this population. So there were my 3 questions. Let's talk about who I'm investigating. So who's the population? So Nagishi calls them mediators, and I think that's a lovely name for them because the kind of people I'm going to show you right now, they do a lot of mediating. A lot of their job is communicating in different ways to different people for different purposes. For my study, I'm going to call them PIDs, professionals in different disciplines, because for me, that's what they are. They're doing a professional job. They're just in a different discipline to language testing and assessment. Some of the roles are generic. So you've got project managers and operations managers who could be in any field. But at the moment, at the British Council, they're working with language testing and assessment. You've got marketing managers, business development managers, you've got academic managers, you've got country directors who you might think, well, what have they got to do with language testing and assessment? Well, what they've got to do is to talk to policymakers, to talk to high-level stakeholders in the countries that they're operating in, to engage them. So what do these people do? This is a whole range of what these people do. So they answer queries, they exchange information, they support and advise, they participate in internal strategic conversations, and I would argue that they participate in external ones as well. So this is not an exhaustive list of what they do. This is just, I've just taken a chunk of the data and pulled some of the things out to show you. But there is an awful lot of information about language testing and assessment that these stakeholders take on with a wide range of external stakeholders for different purposes in different ways. And for me, that basically means that you need an awful lot of knowledge and skill and an understanding of the content of these conversations and the context that these conversations are operating. So there are a lot of moving parts in what, I'm going to go back a minute, these people are doing. Just to say one thing, all of these are managers and one director. So I decided to focus on managers for several reasons. In qualitative studies, the advice is to go to where you think the information, the richest information is first. And that's what I did. I went to managers who I knew worked with language testing and assessment, and that was a brilliant start. However, the more I talked to managers, I realized that talking to a few managers was not going to be enough if I wanted the background, the context, the information that I was looking for. And so I had a choice to make. I could either talk to managers across different departments in exams in English and get a breadth of information at one level, or I could focus in on one department and go right deep through the levels. And as this was an exploratory study, and I was using methodology that hadn't been used for this kind of study before, I decided to go for breadth across English and exams, because choosing a department would have meant I excluded a portion, a big portion of the LTA activity in the British Council. So that's why I chose managers. This is what they do, and this is who they do it with. So their functions are extensive, but so are the people that they work with. They're a very diverse group. So from policymakers to parents, from learners to academics, to assessment specialists, whether they're internal or external. So these managers I was talking about, they talk to people like yourselves. But then in the mix, you've also got market research agencies and content creators. So very, very interesting and diverse audiences that my population interacts with. So what did I use? I used constructivist grounded theory methodology. Now, why did I do that? Because I wanted to give my participants a voice. I wanted to hear their stories. I was interested in Lao. And I had my own story going into this study, but I wanted to know if they shared any of my story or whether they had completely separate stories. And one way to do that was using constructivist grounded theory methodology. And the other reason for using it is that this methodology encourages co-construction. It encourages collaboration. And as I was an insider in the context, I thought that this might work really well. So data collection. So this is a fully qualitative study. I collected data through interviews, focus groups, document analysis, and member checking. And the analysis included initial and focus coding, constant comparison, memoing, lots and lots and lots of memoing, theorization, abstraction, abduction to get me to my final theory. So I love this picture, and I don't think I could describe grounded theory methodology any better than Glaser has here. And I don't usually read quotes off screens, but I'm going to read this because it makes me smile. So doing grounded theory is subsequent, sequential, simultaneous, serendipitous, and scheduled, and not in this or any other predetermined order. And this is so, so, so true. I hadn't read this quote before I started the study, and I'm glad I didn't, because it might have scared me. But with this methodology, the moment that you've located your first document or the moment you've scheduled your first interview, it really is a whirlwind, because you're analyzing as you're collecting data. The data is leading you. The whole process is incredibly investigative and difficult. There are hard decisions to make because the data is saying lots and lots of things, and you have to make decisions because you can't do everything. There really just isn't the time, and nor do you want to, because you've got research questions to answer. So there are hard decisions to make, and there are tough data to leave aside and focus on what you want to do. But the methods within all of this are very robust. And one thing that you have to do as a researcher is stay true to yourself, your data, and your research questions. But the fourth thing you have to stay true to in grounded theory methodology are the participants. So one thing about the methodology, and this is abound in the literature, is that you may have your research questions, but you really have to stay true to what your participants are telling you. So what they're telling you may not be anything to do with what you're interested in. Luckily for me, my participants all work with language testing and assessment in one way or another. And through the conversations about language assessment literacy, their own concerns came about as well. So that was good. So I'm going to jump in straight to some findings. it's really difficult in a short presentation to share everything, and the next 3 slides do come with a health warning. I am going to share some quotes with you, so you are going to have to do a little bit of reading, but they kind of give you a picture of the data, the concepts that emerged in the data. So the first question, what are the perceptions of LAL needs in British Council? I'm just going to pull them all up and let you read for a moment. And I apologize for talking of your reading if you're still reading, but as you can see, that's quite an interesting range. We have some concerns. Not everybody wants to be a PhD. So just to give you a little bit of context behind that quote, LAL as a concept wasn't really socialized into British Council language or terminology until Barry O'Sullivan arrived and the Assessment Research Group was born. And at that point, Barry and Jamie and Barry and Vivian, Barry had PhDs and Jamie was working towards his. And there was this conception in the British Council that, oh my gosh, if you know about assessment, you've got to have a PhD. And that's where this comes from. It is a concern because it also tells me that some people think that LAL is a very technical and academic concept, but that's what their view is. Then there is no career pathway in assessment. So I really understand this. If you have limited time on learning and development, why would you spend it in an area that is not going to help you progress in your career? So in the British Council at the moment, if you do want to progress in the area of assessment, it really is either going to test development or doing research. So I completely understand that as well. The comment below that, participant 13, the area of assessment is opaque. I think this was a very brave thing for this participant to say, and I do think that she was being diplomatic. A couple of participants talked about fear of assessment, which I found really, really sad. But the fact that sometimes people like me who work with assessment, we take it for granted that everybody kind of understands what we mean when we say assessment. One participant actually said to me, well, what do you mean by assessment? And that was a really good question. What did I mean? Because assessment for them could have been anything from a test to evaluation. So that was really interesting, but interesting in that it acknowledged the fact that, we really need support around assessment. And we're not always sure where to get that from. The other quote kind of takes us to the other end of the spectrum a bit, where participant 19 thinks that, well, everybody needs it. If you're working with it, you need to know about it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to do your job as well as you could. And that's also fair enough. And participant 26 says, well, I'm a big fan. Everybody needs a basic level, because if we don't have that basic knowledge, how are we all going to talk to each other? And that's a really good point. And that came out in the data very, very strongly about terminology and a basic level of knowledge. So what knowledge and skills are people performing key business functions perceived to need? So again, I've taken a selection that kind of show you a spectrum of what was coming out in the data. I'll let you read those for a second. So participant 5, from her perspective, is really interested in employees knowing about the products and knowing how to differentiate them from competitors, knowing what the content of a product is, trying to assess what are we trying to assess? So the construct, who are the users, what are the consequences? Whereas participant 14 is talking about assessment for learning. And this I thought was a really interesting comment, because she's saying, you know, I know what assessment for learning is and I use it all the time. How do you communicate the value of that to parents? And that's who she was talking about. And that's not as easy as we think it might be, especially when parents in some contexts are expecting test scores and they're expecting hard measures of progress. So that was an interesting comment. Participant 19, the comment about training programs and colleagues within commercial and business needing to upskill. And one of those areas is assessment literacy. And that for me was really, really telling, because yes, they are interested in assessment literacy, but it's one area. There are others. But then taking us outside the British Council a bit, saying, you know, we need to understand the field and the context that we're working in order to write bids that will get judged by adjudicators who know the field. And that was really interesting. This quote makes me smile a lot. Products from the product side, the assessment side, from the business side, you know, pricing and stuff. So again, about products. Before I talked to this participant, I hadn't even thought about products from the business side. I didn't even really know what that meant, because my work it doesn't come close to the commercial side at all. But looking at products from perspectives that I, doing this study, hadn't even thought about. Just a few more. So participant 10 thinks we need to think about our customers more. And to me, that makes complete sense. Participant 26 says, yeah, knowing the products is great. Also need to know about technology, need to know a little bit about the theory, because what I have to do in my job is to take all of that expertise that sits in the assessment research group, for example, and translate that into messages for people who are not experts in the area. So I need that background. And then she goes on to say, well, one very basic thing is a vocabulary. So it goes back to talking the same language. And sometimes using terms, hearing terms, throwing about terms that we don't fully understand. Again, a very brave comment, because I do feel that sometimes in organizations, there is an expectation to know what is being talked about without that content being fully explained. And participant 7's comment about needing a framework. So you've got all this knowledge, but how do you transfer that into the skills that are needed for your business function? And how do you develop that knowledge into those skills to be able to talk about assessment in a meaningful way to all those lovely stakeholders that I showed you? So very, very diverse comments. We're thinking about context and content and products and technology and some theory. We're talking about wanting the same language. But what I took away from these range of quotes and all the hundreds of others that are very similar is that we're talking about knowledge to do with assessment, but not in an isolated way. We're talking about it integrated with the skills that are needed for these key business functions. So that brings me to research question 3, the dimensions of language assessment related knowledge. So what I did is I took all of these quotes, all of this lovely evidence, and basically through a process of mostly abstraction, but some abduction, came out with this list. These are the dimensions that my data gave me. Now, I didn't come up with them on my own. I had to look on the World Wide Web to find out about product knowledge, because one of the things that came through in the data really, really strongly was that managers kept saying to me, our teams don't know what they don't have product knowledge. They don't know what our products are. And I found that really surprising, because surely if you're selling something, you should know about it. So I asked, I went back to a couple of participants and I said, do we have an understanding in an organization of what product knowledge is? Do we have a shared understanding? And the answer was no, we don't. So I did my own bit of research and I came across a product knowledge framework that was developed by Safety Culture. And I adapted it for the purposes of my population. And I call it a product and services knowledge framework, because it's not about just products, it's about services as well. But it can't work on its own. It's not a standalone thing. It can be, but it's not as effective. Worth saying that each one of these elements, customer knowledge, organizational brand, customer journey, they all come with descriptors that give you more information about what customer knowledge means. What do we mean for customer knowledge and language assessment literacy? Organizational brand. Now, a lot of people think that an organizational brand is about the logo or the name, but it's so much more than that. It's about the philosophy of your products, behind your products. It's about the organization's values and things like that. So all of these elements, they come with detailed descriptors underneath. And I would share them, but I don't have time. You can write to me for them. But importantly, they have to work with the relevant business function skills that come with the key business areas. So whether that's marketing, business development, customer service, account management, sales, teaching. Because when we talk about knowledge and skills for the population I've talked about, they don't really need the skills and assessment unless they're teaching. They're not developing tests. They're not marking tests. They're not doing research into tests. But what they are doing is selling them and talking about them and writing about them and communicating about them, which are the relevant business skills for them. So these are the dimensions I came out with. So as far as my research questions go, hooray, got my answers, which is brilliant, made me very happy. However, if you remember, I said that grounded theory methodology was about putting the participants' concerns first, and I did not ignore my participants' concerns at all. I answered my research questions, but as I collected and analysed data, I did the same analysis for my participants' concerns and actually found that there were 8 categories, of which 7 of them were participants' concerns. And if you look in the bottom, what is for me, the left-hand corner, defining language assessment literacy for the organisation is one of those concerns. So in terms of my grounded theory, as opposed to my research questions, I have 8 categories. I have evolving assessment in the organisation as a contextual category. And that was really important. Many participants felt, regardless of the department they were in, that they had to explain to me why they were saying what they were saying, what had brought them, what had happened in the past in the organisation to make them say what they said to me. The core category is creating the conditions to grow the business. And really everything my participants told me, everything they said to me, all their work is geared towards this, creating the conditions to grow the business. The 4 categories in the middle, you see scrutinising learning and development in the organisation. They felt, participants felt that if the business was to grow, we really need to look at learning and development in the organisation and really take a hard look at it. And defining LAL is one part of it. Another part of it is developing people managers. People managers in organisations tend to be gatekeepers to opportunities or cheerleaders. So you support your teams in doing whatever they want so they can do their work, or you gatekeep a little bit. You kind of look at the opportunities for learning and development. You think about the targets you have to meet. You think about the resources and the time you have, and you make some difficult decisions. But overall, participants were saying to me that really in the British Council, we need to focus on developing managers who can manage people. Having meaningful conversations. I won't spend much time on this because, as I said, my whole population that I talk to, 90% of their job is talking or communicating in different ways to different stakeholders. And for those conversations to be meaningful and have an impact on creating the conditions to grow the business, then we really need to look at learning and development as well. Acknowledging and aligning expertise. This was something that was really interesting. Firstly, notions of expertise in the organisation, very disparate and very interesting. And acknowledging the fact that all the assessment expertise lay in one or two teams in the organisation. But also the fact that if we are going to create the conditions to grow the business, then we need to acknowledge expertise that is outside of assessment and align it with that assessment expertise. So we have great marketing expertise, we have great sales expertise, we have brilliant business development expertise. How do we align them to work better and more effectively for the organisation? And finally, operationalising organisational culture. I'm sure British Council is not the only organisation in the world that sometimes the different departments end up working in silos. You kind of get in your lane and you do what you're doing, and you forget to kind of look up and see, oh, what's happening there? Maybe I could collaborate there. Maybe I could work better with this person. Maybe that person can help me. Maybe I can help them. So in terms of the organizational culture that is in the strategy and the corporate plan, it's a very integrated culture. In reality, it doesn't always work like that. So how can we do that better? So I have come nearly to the end of my presentation. Yeah, that's 30 minutes. So I think I've been really, really fortunate. I've managed to answer my research questions in terms of LAL. There is a framework, it needs more work. This isn't the end of anything. I see it as a starting point. And LAL, in relation to my participants' concerns, it is definitely part of the story. It isn't the focus. And I think that's okay, because I think from a language testing and assessment point of view, when we talk about language assessment literacy, we often put that at the core of what we're doing. Why don't people have it? Maybe they should have that. Oh, here's a list of things that maybe teachers could do, for example. But it's sometimes I think it's nice just to flip it and say, okay, so what are our participants thinking about? And does LAL fit into that? And if so, how does it fit into that? Thank you very much indeed. It's me.
Thank you so much, Mina. That was really interesting, and I can only imagine the amount of data you had and the amount of work this took, talking to all of these different people and somehow managing to bring things together in bringing all these different perspectives together. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. We do have a few questions from the participants, and one in particular, so talking about the grander theory approach, one participant was one of our audience members asking, what were some of the interesting avenues that you did not pursue? As there were many that you did, but what were the ones that you couldn't because of scope?
So one of the avenues was the decision about just focusing on managers. So quite a few of the managers said, oh, you know, you should talk to X and you should talk to Y and you should talk to them. That was going down the organizational level. And I actually am going to recommend that as a future study because I think it's worth doing. But that was a really tough decision because I really wanted to talk to them, but there just isn't time to talk to everybody. So that was one. The other, and this was a constant tough decision throughout, and it was really hard, was actually to keep the participants' concerns in mind and not just focus on the LAL, because I could have just answered the research questions and said, you know what, the participants were concerned about this, that, and the other, but you know what, this is what I found out about LAL. So that was really hard, trying to keep an equal balance on that. Does that answer the question?
Thank you. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We have a question from Jay. Says, your work represents a meaningful contribution to language assessment literacy studies. Thank you. Might I please check if your participants address the question of their responsibilities towards British Council tests and assessments, such as how their work might impact the quality and defensibility of the assessments? Did they answer questions like these?
They did, but they skirted a bit. So they talked a lot about consequences. They talked a lot about impact, and they talked a lot about the consequences of not having LAL. So that has come out as well. So what could happen? What are the risks to the organisation if the population I was talking to didn't have the appropriate or the right level of language assessment literacy? So yes, they did. They kind of acknowledge that if people sell a test for purposes it was not designed for, there are going to be repercussions, not only for the users, not only for the test takers, but for the organisation also. So yes, they did.
Thank
That
you.
was a good question.
We also have one from Haiwan Lee. Thank you for your insightful presentation. I couldn't agree more with the concerns and needs expressed by your participants, as well as the importance of tailoring these to fit their individual professional context. Now that you've developed a framework that can be applied in your immediate setting, do you have plans to implement it and translate your research findings into practice? So even a bigger project, Mina.
Thank you, Haiwan. I want to say I would love to, but that's not my decision to make. So what I'm going to do is hand over what I found to the organisation, and it is up to the powers that be. But if I'm given any time at all in my work, I would love to, because there is a multitude of things that can be done. I mean, we've got a framework, we've got descriptors under it. I mean, the next most obvious thing to do is then go and talk to those teams and say, you know what, let's kind of do a LAL profile for you. So, Haiwan, I would love to. I'll keep my fingers crossed, but I don't know yet.
I think maybe it related to this, some of these, because you talked about the powers to be, and Chihiro is asking, after saying thank you for a fantastic presentation, who would be in the best position to lead the defining LAL for the organization, in your opinion?
So this was addressed by my participants as well. They think it's a shared responsibility. So at the moment, I mean, there have been, and I should have said, I'm really sorry, I'm not the first to look at this in the British Council. There have been interventions before, but those interventions have been by the experts, the specialists, looking at LAL for other people. And what came out in the data was really interesting. Participants would like a collaborative effort. So they want, our human resources department is called the people function now. So they would like the people function involved. They'd like to be involved from their different function areas, but they'd also obviously like language testing and assessment specialists involved as well. So they would really like to see a collaborative effort to steer the direction this goes in.
Thank you. We also have a question from Nikki. Language assessment can rely on a lot of technical information and specialist expertise. Is it realistic, in your opinion, to expect large numbers of staff to be well informed about these?
Nikki, I think there's a piece of work to do in that kind of basic layer of knowledge that everybody wants. And I think that will come out in the descriptors. But in terms of kind of the technical knowledge, and that is role dependent. That is role dependent. So I was talking to some participants who their roles, their jobs are so diverse that actually they spend a lot of time talking to the Barry O'Sullivans of this world to try and understand the construct and the concepts that he's talking about. But then at the other end of the scale, what they're doing is writing messages for candidates to take the IELTS test, for example. So it depends on the role, and I think that is very role specific where the profiles would come in.
I think, and Nikki can correct me if I'm wrong, I think we've come to the end of the time we've got for this presentation. Nikki, am I correct?
Yes, we can probably just squeeze in one more question, as we've got some some lovely questions there. Thank you.
Okay, I will add the last one. Thank you for the presentation again. We've got an anonymous participant asking, what steps would you recommend as a starting point for institutions looking to introduce LAL gradually?
Number one, I recommend talking to people. And I recommend talking to representatives, or as many people as you can, who will be impacted by this gradual LAL introduction. That's the first thing I would do. And that includes your language testing and assessment specialists. The other thing I would do is talk to the people that would impact, but I would also talk to the people who are going to have to do this training or whatever the LAL looks like in the organisation. Because one of the things that I touched on with participants was the kind of training that they want. And obviously, since COVID, that's changed a lot. Organizations now are not kind of doing in-person workshops anymore. A lot of training is online, synchronous, asynchronous, blended, all of this. So I think it's worth thinking about not only what you do, but how you do it. And that's really important. So you're kind of doing a two-pronged thing. You're talking to representation from across the organization. You know, what is it that you think might be interesting? And let's think about how we build that. But then at the bottom, think about, well, you know, how do you want this delivered?
Yeah, that's a great insight. Thank you. And just, should we stop?
Marvelous. Thank you so much, Mina. Thank you.
Thank you.
You
Thanks for
answered
having me.
questions so brilliantly. And Nahal, thank you so much for collating and posing all of those questions. So we'll go over now for a short break again.